every genre has its own kind of vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah.
So knowing your genre is really, really important so that you can play into that and use the vocabulary of that genre to your advantage.
Mm. Yeah.
Every script, a horror script and a dramatic script and a science fiction script and like an action script, they should all kind of look different for very, very important reasons.
Is there one genre that you think it's maybe easier to write then, or is there one that's particularly harder to write in, do you think?
Thrillers are thrillers are tough.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
um, because I mean you have to create tension on the page, right? You're using a dead inanimate page to try to elicit this feeling of tension and unease, that type of thing. Horror movies too should startle and frighten and make people uneasy as well. I don't know.
Mm.
I suppose they're all difficult in their own way because even a drama that seems pretty straightforward has to elicit an emotional response. So the better response is it doesn't matter what genre you're working in. They say, and I believe very strongly, that the number one job of the writer is to elicit an emotional response. And I typically add on a little bit more by saying you need to be able to elicit the intended emotional response. Because if you write a horror movie and people laugh their way through it, well, I wouldn't call that success, right?
No.
So you have to, when you commit to writing a screenplay, it really is critical that you understand you are committing to becoming an expert in genre.
Mm.
You need to know not just the language of Pagecraft, which is unique to screenwriting in general, but then there's a subcategory of Pagecraft that's unique to each genre too. And you need to learn that and use that to your advantage.
We're going to be looking at my feature-length screenplay that I've started writing my first draft on, and it's a psychological horror. Oh, actually, no, psychological thriller. So it's supposed to kind of like leave the audience questioning, like what we were saying actually, Jordan, about creating characters that you don't want to give all the answers to. You want to allow the audience to kind of listen in and piece it together themselves. I'm trying to create that with this screenplay. So these first 5 pages, it might not all make sense because obviously you're not supposed to know all the information early in the screenplay. And I always think if there's ever a time to confuse the audience, the start isn't maybe a bad time to do it momentarily because the audience knows, well, I'm not supposed to know yet because it's the start, so this is okay. Clearly, I'm going to be told later why this is happening. Does that make sense?
It does. I appreciate the intentions and what you're saying there.
Yeah.
However, the word confusion is always a massive red flag.
Yeah.
So mystery is great. Confusion is death.
Mm.
So somehow you've got to walk that razor's edge and create the kind of mystery that makes people wonder and want to try to solve the puzzle. Yes, but if you successfully confuse them, then you've lost.
Yeah.
You can't go that far in that direction or they won't keep reading. They'll get frustrated and stop.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll probably talk a little bit about the choices you've made in the setup in that first scene and what you're hoping to achieve there. And I hope you're comfortable with being transparent about it because that's important to me. Like I'll pretend that you're a client of mine and I'm helping you kind of sort this out. My job is to ask as many questions as possible so that I can understand the writer and try to attune myself to the writer's voice. Again, when I work with people, it's not about me injecting my sensibilities into the story. It's about helping them articulate their own kind of vision and their own voice. So I'll ask some questions about, why? And then I'll maybe kind of suggest other options for you and let you choose which one seems right for you. And if you're committed to doing what you've done on the page, then it's a matter of, okay, well, now how can we go from what we have now to being most effective at getting to the experience you want your reader to have? That's what it's all about. So we're in a psychological thriller, which means, yes, mystery is an important part of it. Oftentimes the antagonistic forces are kind of mysterious and aren't clear until at least the midway point. That's not uncommon, but we've got to really clearly articulate what the obstacles are for the protagonist early on so that the reader at least understands what they're up against and where they think they're going. Now, in 5 pages, we don't need to establish that, but by the end of Act 1, we need to understand exactly what their problem is, what their solution to the problem is, and how they plan on actually tackling it, so that when they step into Act Two, they're committing to the pursuit of their initial solution to the problem anyway, which typically doesn't turn out to be the real problem. That the real problem gets revealed later on, but
Yeah.
they'll have an idea of what they think the problem is, and they'll start off kind of dealing with that at the end of Act One.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It's all very casual. It's just conversational. And I just want to say to everyone while you're here and those listening to the recorder later, I really appreciate all of you doing this. We all know how protective we are of our work and how vulnerable it can feel to kind of share your work with other people. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I applaud them for doing this for everyone's sake. And it's not easy to watch people kind of roll around in your work and kind of break it apart.
Yeah.
But the idea here is that we want to have this kind of deeper discussion about Pagecraft and to really underline how important it is. It's not just about engineering and composing a really effective moving story. Now you've got a second kind of challenge, which is how do I present it on the page so that it actually works the way that I want it to? How do I present it on the page so that everyone reading it sees exactly the movie that I'm trying to make? So they can't misinterpret it or reinterpret it and kind of go down blind alleys and get frustrated. I want them to see exactly the movie that I plan on making. So that's the trick. Storycraft, very important, but Pagecraft will kill even a really good storycrafter if it's not done well as well. So first impressions are very important. Now, if you're writing a script for yourself, and that you're going to make the movie that's based on the script that you're writing, then of course there's a lot less pressure on you to present your work in a particular way. And it can be a horrible mess. As long as you can interpret it, that's fine. But if you plan on having other people read your work and you want to go into production with other people or sell your script, that type of thing, then how you present your work on the page is important for that reason too. Because in theory, you're kind of meeting everyone in the middle and you all share this kind of same language that you understand. You're speaking in a language they get, and it's presented on the page in a particular way, which is important to production staff. We won't get into that exactly, but there's a reason why this really strange, counterintuitive type of Pagecraft exists that is unique to movie making. So the first thing that people are going to do when they crack open that cover page, if they don't know you, don't care about you, don't really know anything about your work, is this the work of a professional? It's a really cold, heartless kind of question to ask. But professional readers think this way. Is this a professional piece of work? Because professional readers, people who are hired to do nothing but read stacks and stacks and stacks of screenplays looking for excellent ones that their companies can put into production, they are looking for reasons to throw your work aside. And part of your job as a new screenwriter breaking in is to make sure that you give them as few of those reasons as possible. If you're a very successful screenwriter, then you can bend the rules all you want. You can even break them. But we, as the greenhorns in the industry, we can't get away with that. So we have to be kind of careful. Somehow we've got to find a balance between presenting our voice in a nice, bold way, which is always interesting, and adhering to the guidelines in a safe, predictable way too, so they don't push back on that. Okay, so we're talking about, like you say, a psychological thriller. And the first thing I noticed is that we don't have any scene heading in the first page.
No. I took it out.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. It's difficult to know. Something about that seems wrong. And that's a pretty standard thing. What are we opening on? Maybe there's a black, a superimposed kind of text on black or something that you open like that. And then we move into the first scene. But here we don't have an opening scene heading. And I think that's a missed opportunity there. So let's just say that this first line, I'll make this bigger too so everyone can see a little easier now that we're not trying to share a screen. Okay, so we'll say that in a coming draft, we'll make this a formal scene heading. And then we open up on an empty field on a dark and gloomy day. That's fine. I don't have any particular issue with that. But the first thing I'm trying to latch onto is a character, and it's right here now. Is there more that we can do with the tone? You're suggesting a tone with this overcast, kind of gloomy day. And I'm just curious, why is that important?
Because I wanted to have contrast between the setting and then James. Like Because I feel like I just had this image in my head, starting a thriller, dark and gloomy, and then the contrast, James pops up from frame, like, and he's radiating with happiness. Nothing matters to him. It may be raining, he doesn't care. He's overwhelmingly happy.
Yeah, nice. Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. So this is the kind of conversation I would have with people. I just want to understand where you're going with it, and I see your point. I think that's a nice pursuit for the scene. So we see James. Now, I might actually flip the structure of this sentence so that we actually describe him moving into frame before we get into describing him in detail, so that the reader can really understand what's happening instantly. There's a term called the paraprosdokian, which is a really ridiculous term that nobody's ever heard of, but that suggests that the most important information comes last. So you end with, the camera is definitely important, but in this case, I might want to know more about how James moves into the picture, which is buried mid-sentence right now. Because we get the movement in first, the action in first, then we can settle in on the description of James and spend a little more time with that. So I might play around with how you structure that. A young man smiling walks into frame or steps into frame. If you wanted him to kind of come up from the bottom, that might look a little awkward. So I might have him just kind of step into frame, something a little more traditional, so that the description is really, really crystal clear. Nobody misinterprets it again. But James, now, whenever you do a character introduction, it's not right or wrong. It's about, is this an opportunity to capture the essence of this character and give the reader an opportunity to kind of invest in them? Without that, characters can read kind of like placeholders, and readers can be indifferent to them. Not every screenplay does it, but I would consider it strongly, like spending a little more time on your character and trying to capture the essence of who they are, not what they look like. In the old days, what they looked like was really considered important, but these days it's more about their point of view, like their emotional state, what makes them special and unique, what makes them a really interesting candidate for the kind of adventure that you're about to put them through. I like to say the hell that you're about to put them through, because it can't be a nice, comfortable day after all. It has to be potentially the worst day of their life to trigger the type of change or the type of statement that you want to make with your story. So it's going to be an intense adventure that they go through. And what makes James so interesting? You're suggesting that he's kind of determined to be happy despite the conditions around him. And that's an interesting aspect of that character. So how might you be able to capture that in 1 or 2 words? That's what I'm suggesting. And think about that. His radiating with happiness is great, but think about why. You know, what's that saying about his character, and how else might we be able to capture that? Because character introductions are one of the very few places in a screenplay where you get to be truly poetic. You get to describe something that doesn't appear on screen. There are other exceptions. We won't get into that right now. But for the most part, you're only really allowed to describe what will appear on screen. But with a character introduction, again, I keep going back to the word essence. You can poetically describe the essence of that character in hopes of creating some interest from the reader. They don't have to be likable. There was a post on school in your group there just recently about, you know, how do we describe a character that's likable? And the conversation was, well, they don't have to be likable. They just have to be fascinating. They have to be interesting. What about them kind of pulls us into their story and makes us want to follow them through it? So I would suggest spending a little more time with James and giving him kind of a description of his character, but start with the action of this young man moving into frame, and then let us know who James is and why we should care about him. Okay, back to the sentence. Moves into frame. So why have you capped frame?
It's a technical point. That's what I capitalize things. That's more like a technical decision, like a camera movement, or I know some people do this, but I don't know if it's actually the right thing to do.
Well, typically, it's capping is for a sound effect or a really important object that's absolutely key to the scene. Sometimes movement for sure, but what you've drawn attention to is the frame, not the movement, which is over here. So that seems a little awkward for me. And in fact, if you just went to regular lowercase here, it wouldn't really affect anything at all, because the most important part is just how he moves into frame. So again, I might think about separating that action of him stepping into frame, moving into frame, however you like, and then right below it, a separate paragraph on who he is and what the essence of that character is. And I might bundle, this is a term that I use, but not everybody uses, that movement into your first line, so that you've got two lines up here which describe the setting and then the movement of him into frame. And then the second paragraph would be all about James and why we're going to want to follow him around. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. No troubles at all. And by all means, jump in if I'm just talking too much.
No.
Let me know if you've got thoughts, because I think everybody would love to hear, the
Yeah.
experience from your seat as well.
Okay.
Okay, so the third paragraph now, this is one of my favorite kind of devices here, is the double dash. He raises the camera and snaps a picture of double dash, but you don't need the double dash down here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This is kind of a device used in dialogue where one character's line of dialogue is cut off,
Enough.
and the
Yeah.
next character's line of dialogue is kind of interjected into the scene. Then you need that. But this isn't necessary, and it kind of messes with how things are formatted a little bit. So if you cut that out, it cleans it up a little bit. Now we have Lulu, and again, same suggestion. Let's figure out a little bit more about who she is. You've described that she's beautiful. Sure, that's great. In this day and age, just so everyone's aware, describing a female character with only their attributes, their physical attributes, not considered as cool anymore. That used to be a very common thing back in the day, but now we want to know why they're special and why they're a part of the story as well. Now, I think because of where the scene goes, you describing her as being beautiful could be important, because she seems to be the target of unwanted attention, maybe because she is, I'm not sure yet. But if that's the case and it's story related and it's important to the story that she's beautiful, sure. But we still want a little more, and we want to go a little deeper than that. So again, we can appreciate her perspective on the story. Again, what makes her special above and beyond just her physical appearance.
Can I ask a quick question? Because it might be a silly question, but because it's a mystery, and at the start you don't necessarily know why they're interesting until the film starts unfolding, and then you start revealing more things about themselves. And especially for the opening scene, because it's a dream sequence, maybe it's supposed to be a bit superficial, maybe it's supposed to be a bit they're a bit two-dimensional characters, but then like what you're saying, that won't be interesting for the reader, or maybe for the audience that won't be interesting.
Yeah, it's a deeper conversation. This is really good, because
Yeah.
one of my questions would be, did this scene actually happen to him? Or is
Exactly, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question.
And if it didn't, then we could tackle it a completely different way. Because if it didn't, then why would you want to actually make a formal character introduction of the beautiful girl?
Yeah.
It might just be that you describe the girl and she's just one of the details of this scene, but she's not a focal character. But by capping her name, you're suggesting it's a formal character introduction, which suggests that she's going to be a big part of the story and that we're going to get to know her later. But maybe that's not the case. Or maybe you really do want to hold back who she is until later. So then it would be, he raises the camera and snaps a picture of a beautiful young woman.
Okay.
And you keep her that mysterious, at least for now. Yeah, this all factors to consider for sure. You make a good point. But if she were going to be going on the adventure with him, so to speak, then I'd want to know more about her now. But if she's just a mysterious character that he's kind of chasing, then maybe you do not introduce her by name yet.
Got it.
A suggestion.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the wording of this, be cautious about explanatory language. Don't explain anything. And I would take that to the extreme. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we probably can't get to today, but be careful that you don't really explain anything at all, and don't let your characters explain anything at all unless you absolutely can't get around it. You can get around it. Your characters might not, especially in thrillers where there's some kind of, bigger picture technical thing where they're explaining why the satellite laser beam has to be here at this time. There's times where people have to monologue out a bunch of information, but other than that type of thing, And even that's a crutch, by the way. You want to avoid that if you possibly can, but if you need to, you need to. And if they do it, bury it under action so the scene is more interesting than just a talking head. But here, and for you as the writer, try to avoid explaining anything. So you're saying here, who has a face that a lot of men would lose sleep over. I might word it a little differently. Yeah, the kind of beauty that gets unwarranted attention is the idea here.
Because I didn't want to just straight up say she's beautiful. I kind of wanted to not say that because I never like to say straight up someone's beautiful, because if you're casting this, a great actor might think, well, I'm not beautiful. Like, it's very subjective what beauty is. So I kind of just wanted to say objectively, a lot of men would lose sleep over her.
Yeah, so it's about the unwanted. Well, and again, what's the point that you're making specifically? Is it they're losing sleep over her, or that she gets the unwanted attention?
It's
Is that
it's basically because the film basically is about, so James literally does lose sleep over her throughout the film. That's kind of what the story's about. So that's kind of why I like to explain it in that way. So because he starts getting paranoid, it's called Phantom Affair. So he starts dreaming about an affair happening. I won't go into it, but yeah, he does get more paranoid over her, and then he loses sleep over it.
Yeah, so that's great. So if you and I were working together, then we'd really get into the nitty-gritty of exactly the messaging in here. But I guess the point for this exercise is that every word that you choose comes loaded with meaning. You want to make certain that the meaning that it has actually works towards telling your story. It's working for you and not against you. So I often have like hour-long conversations about a single scene, you know, like what word works best here? What were you trying to say? What are you setting up for later? All that type of thing. So, you know, a haunting beauty might be another way you do it, which also in only 2 words tries to sell the same message that took you an entire sentence to do. And efficiency and succinctness is also something that's a really important skill to develop. If you can say it with 1 word instead of 2, that's always better.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's go past that then, because there's a lot of details that we won't get to appreciate here in just this first page. But the second sentence of this paragraph is, she gets ready for another picture. And my question to you is, what does that look like?
Yeah, even I don't know, to be honest. I can't, that was a lazy line that I put in, but I just wanted to show her that she basically poses for another picture, ready to take it. Yeah.
So that sentence that you just gave me works better. She poses for another picture. Sometimes the simpler language is better. In fact, I would always lean in that direction.
Got it.
Don't fancy, don't make it flowery. It's not like a novel. It should be as straight line as possible. So you might say that she brushes her hair aside and poses for another picture. You know, just some kind of thing that really sells the fact that she got ready for another shot. And James snaps again. Now, if you are going to use the caps for important details, then you could cap these snaps, because that's a really important sound effect for the scene. If that click is important to you as the director of the movie, or you're suggesting it would be for the production staff, then they're going to want to know that by isolating those sound effects, they know in post-production they got to go back in there and make those things happen and make them stand out. So, and clicks, I might go with click then, because that's specifically a sound. He raises the camera, clicks a picture of, and then later on it's James clicks again. Click. Make that. But a lot of writers don't remember that they've got sound to work with. Later on in your script, you refer to smell as well, but that doesn't work the same way. We'll talk about that when we get there. But sound for sure can work for you, and really, really well. And when you're into thrillers and horror movies and that type of thing in particular, they're critical. So how you present that on the page is also really, really important. But so I might cap those.
Yeah.
Okay. As you could cut that, it wouldn't hurt that line at all.
Yeah.
I would go through every screenplay and kill that as.
Yeah.
All of them. He waits for the Polaroid to print. And then we don't want to repeat any words if we don't have to. He is back here. So we can speak in kind of a fragmented language in screenplays, which don't really work as well in like books, novels, and that type of thing. So he waits for the Polaroid to print, comma, glances up and smiles at her. That would be perfectly fine. And again, you are at war with the space that you have on the page. So you're literally at war with every word. And if they cannot If they aren't absolutely necessary, kill off as many words as you possibly can. Lean that page out and create as much white space as possible so that when the reader is reading it, it has what they call a waterfall effect, where their eyes can just fall down the page almost effortlessly. Because the challenge is that it should take no more effort to read your script than to watch that movie. Consider that. That's an
Yeah.
amazing kind of goal to have. That means that it just has to be so clearly written and so quickly read that they never have to stop to wonder what you meant or to decipher a word or a description. It just goes in exactly the way that you want it to into their mind. So we could definitely get this down to a single line easily. You know, and that's another thing that we fight for is I don't see what's literally called an orphan, but this, can we trim that line down so it only sits on one line instead of wrapping around into two? Probably. And
Yeah.
that would be something in later drafts I'd want to come back and do.
Yeah.
When you're writing your first draft, let me just say this. When you're writing your first draft, don't worry about any of this stuff. Get it out and get it out in one. You know it's going to be rough. It doesn't matter. Don't try to make it perfect in your first draft. Just follow your heart, write down whatever comes to mind, and then we'll go back and fix it. Okay, she smiles back. That's cool. That works. He takes the Polaroid into his bag. Okay, this is an interesting line. So now, being in North America, there is a little bit of difference in language between my continent and your continent, and certainly where Saeed is and everything like that. So I want to be sensitive to that. But takes means that he's pulling out.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
agree with that.
so
Yeah.
puts the Polaroid into his bag or places the Polaroid into his bag would be cleaner and probably more universally understood in the way you intended it.
Yeah.
But you have this but in here, so it doesn't actually get into the bag because he notices something before it goes in. Is this what do you say to that?
No, yeah, you're right. So he does put it in the bag, but then once it's in the bag, he's kind of looking at it, and then he notices the picture starts coming up. So it's
Okay.
as he puts in, yeah, but I've not worded it properly, I don't think.
Yeah. Don't get into properly, not properly, whatever. The word you want to attach yourself to is effectively.
Yeah, effectively.
Good, bad, and all that stuff is indifferent, and it's everybody's got their own opinion. What we're looking for is effective. So write that above your workstation, everybody. The only word that matters is effective. Good or bad, be damned. So he places the Polaroid into his bag, and while staring down, notices something. Now we've got a kind of a cleaner kind of image to go with. And if you can't get it trimmed down again to a single line, then the other thing I want you to think about is, well, then how can I put the rest of this line to use? Is there some other important information that I can put in that line that might be worthy because I've got it now? I've claimed that second line. Now I'm going to put it to use. Now, in later drafts, when you come back and you're trimming like crazy, you might want to get rid of it. But it's something to think about. Can we make that a clearer, cleaner image if we just use a few more words to clarify a little bit? Because we've already committed to a second line. So I might think about that. And these ellipses slow down the read. Do you actually need them?
It's because the pacing of the film, there is a slight pause because we're waiting. Wait, there's an image growing. What is it? And and we cut back to his face. He notices something. Like it's just slowing down the editing, maybe, that I see in my head.
Okay. Then think about this term, and I don't know if anybody else uses the term the way that I do.
Yeah, like that.
So verticalizing it and breaking it apart helps parse out the information that you're describing to the reader, and that will give you that pacing that you're looking for.
Got it.
Left to right doesn't have that same effect that you're hoping for, but vertical does. Oops. Something more like that. And we're not going to get it right in this kind of first, what I call the second first draft, as we're just crashing through this, kind of moving things around a little bit. But consider that now. And in fact, we could reclaim this space because I don't think there's any harm in bundling those two things. Now sometimes you'd want to separate them because when you do, you're suggesting two different camera shots. Like, think about each paragraph being a separate camera shot, and
Yeah.
that there's cuts in between. So
Got
that might be most important, but it might not hurt the read at all to put it back up there. These are things to consider as well. So
Yeah.
he placed the Polaroid into his bag. Something like that. Oops. Yeah, so how does this concept of verticalization, which is a nonsensical word, but bear with me,
Yeah.
stacking or parsing in vertical sit with you?
It makes it easier to one, it's quicker to read, but also for me, you can see the cuts, I think, having it more. It's interesting. I've shown my screenplay to other people, and naturally I do like to have things on one line. They say other people don't like it, and they've told me to do the opposite. But I don't see why, because actually you want to move the reader's eyes down the page, not across the page. And
Yeah,
this does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah. Left to right is for novels.
Yeah.
And we are writing left to right as well. But again, we want to move quickly and effortlessly. So the vertical kind of movement of the eye is more important and more of a priority, I say, than the left to right.
Yeah.
And the pauses. And again, I think physically, if you just read through the page, I would think you're going to admit that those ellipses are kind of softer, and you can imply how those gaps and pauses without slowing down the read at all.
Okay.
So it's interesting that somebody would defend the other way, because that tends to create more dense blocks of text, which is not what screenplays want to do if they can avoid it.
Yeah, got it.
And Saeed, I know you just read one of the Bourne screenplays, and thinking back, did you notice a lot of that verticalization through the action sequences?
Yes, absolutely, and I loved it. I mean, like as I was with Bone, and there was really fast actions, but it was so choreographed, so good in the page that I could see it. I mean, that I've seen the film years ago, and just snaps back, and I can see, oh, that scene, I can remember that, and it was short, but just like what we have here, he places the Polaroid into his bag, two dashes, and then like the next action, the next action, the next action.
Yeah, like this probably isn't necessary, this one, because it's not a fast, it doesn't really suggest the reveal yet, and you don't want to overuse that device. This one does suggest that there's about to be a reveal of some kind of significant piece of information. So this makes more sense to me here. And then I'd probably work on this paragraph here and make it more dramatic. Because if the man's hand appears, the suggestion that it kind of slowly fades into view is not necessarily the kind of dramatic reveal you want. So how do you capture the moment where his mind goes, something's wrong? I think that's probably the most important detail of this particular sequence. He looks down, no big deal. The picture's coming into view, no big deal. Wait a minute, something's terribly, terribly wrong with this image. And then he looks back up and gets it confirmed later. Would you agree that that's kind of the moment you're going for, Oliver?
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I think we're missing the kind of emotional resonance that we're going for here, and we'd have to kick that around for a while. He notices something and so I might even, again, bundling. If we go back up here, how late can we do the trick, the double dash trick? Can we do something more like this? Something like that. So now I've kind of played around with it a little again, and now I'm trying to really pinpoint where the reveal takes place.
Oh, yeah.
So we bundled the first two kind of details of the sequence together.
Yeah.
Looking down, I notice something. The image starts to develop. Lulu fades, not fads, fades into view, but a
But
man's
yeah,
hand appears wrapped around Lulu's waist.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming sharper. That
yeah,
reveal.
it's emphasizing that bit.
Yeah, and again, I'm just crashing around in it, so I'm not saying this is perfect, but I just want to get everybody to kind of think about what is the most important moment? Where is the turn in the sequence? And how do we really pinpoint and elevate that as effectively as we possibly can? Yeah, I might play around with that. You know, James looks up from the bag, snaps, looks, sounds.
Yeah,
Verbs are really, really critical.
yeah,
Think about your verbs. Don't go with the most obvious verb or the most comfortable or the most common verb. Again, what is the movement? He's panicked. So looks, that doesn't capture the panic at all, right? Like if he's afraid, then what kind of a verb can capture that? If he's panicked, what kind of verb can capture that? And play around with it. And does this take a lot of time? Yes. You go through every single line of your screen,
yeah,
hunting and pecking for the right words and killing off as many as you can and keeping only the ones that are elevating your work, because it has to read like a movie. We talked about this at another post too. Is it more important to have it be a technical blueprint for the film, or is it more important for it to read like a movie and to kind of be a fun read? A fun being, you know, interpretable.
Yeah.
A horror movie is not necessarily fun, but you know what I mean, like a roller coaster ride. So it has to be both. The Pagecraft is important to the production and the technical stuff. Yes, yes, yes. But it better stir the emotions of the reader or you've failed. It doesn't care. It won't matter how good the story is. It has to make them feel something. So that's why this line by line stuff is so important. And I'm just looking for ways to get these dramatic reveals in here now.
yeah.
Lulu, embraced. Is another word to kill off.
Okay.
Look for those and get rid of many of those as you can.
Yeah.
By this man. Okay, a man's hand appears wrapped around. Okay, so the man's hand is the item in this shot. And now we've got this man, but you're making an assumption that we know what this guy looks
Okay.
like. And we have
Yeah.
only seen his hand so far. So we need more than that to really appreciate the scene.
Yeah.
And embraced sounds careful, sounds loving even. So
Right. Yeah.
again, verb, what would be a more effective verb to suggest that maybe a big bear of a man has kind of
Grabbed.
grabbed her? Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Grabbed. Did you say side?
Grab. Yeah, I said grab.
Let's try it.
Or like take. It's a bit harsh.
Something else, a detail. Doesn't necessarily have to be about his size or his physical kind of intimidation or you know, whatever, but not man with dark eyes. And if he ever appeared in the scene and spoke, then that could be his character name, Dark Eyes. And if it
Okay.
was, then I'd cap it. Sometimes they do that. Red hoodie, dark eyes, you know, man with knife, that kind of things.
Yeah.
Because we've got two men in this scene and another one's coming up, and we desperately need to make certain that the reader knows they are very different. Two different people. One could be blonde, one could be black hair. Like, polarize them as much as you can. You don't want any two characters to seem similar or they'll just blur together.
Got it.
Lulu grabbed from behind by a man with dark eyes. She tries to cry out. Tries also suggests that we're not, it's soft language. So oops.
Yeah.
Clamped is good, right? That's a nice, that's good with the tone of the scene.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's.
spell check is trying to make me write formal.
It's not a novel.
Go away, spell check. This is a screenplay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
So he sees Lulu grabbed from behind by a man with dark eyes, her cries muffled by his hand clamped across her mouth. And I'm certain that going back, we could distill that down and make it even sharper. It's what I call like sharp, pointy language,
Yeah.
so that you're like trying to draw blood on your reader. I'm just using the metaphor of like sharp, pointed language, so that it's drawing the blood, the emotional blood of your reader. If you use soft language or blunt language, you're not capable of doing that. You go.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I was also thinking for this part of the sequence, it's getting more fast paced. So you kind of want the language to be sharp at this point, even more so, because you
Yeah.
really want to show that it's getting more intense.
Yeah.
So the language, the shorter sentences is going to do that, isn't it?
100%. And say he knows that for a fact because he just read that Born. And when the action is at its height and it's moving like a runaway train, it's very, very short little fragments of information. So it reads particularly fast, which again kind of evokes the experience of watching the movie on the screen through an action sequence. It's really clever and it's really exciting. In my experience, it takes about 3, maybe 4 drafts of heavily reworked like edits of your screenplay. And at that point, the movie starts to emerge off the page. And it's the coolest experience. I'm going through this phase of a development of a screenplay with 3 clients right now. And they get really excited when they can read their work and it starts to read like an actual movie. It's awesome. It's worth the effort. And in fact, it's a necessity because until you get there, no one's going to care about your script. No, it's not going to have the effect that you want it to. So you need to continue to polish and distill until it gets to be the most it can be within whatever genre that you're working. It's great.
Yeah.
I hope everyone gets to experience that because when you do get to experience that, lights will come on and you'll go, aha, now I know. I know what the brief is. I know what my challenge is. And you'll be chasing that for the rest of your life. Okay. So, James, and you can see even here in this whole page, right? It's kind of dense. So we're betraying the kind of effect that we want to have on the reader a little bit because we're forcing them to read what is probably too much.
Yeah.
It's not moving quickly enough, but it's good. At least we've got the concepts down now. And later on, we can go back and rejig and distill. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, if this is fast,
Ones. Yeah.
but he doesn't run though because he's grabbed before he starts to go. So that's another change.
Yeah.
So,
He attempts to run. He kind of lunges forward and then gets pulled back straight away.
yeah. Yeah, lunges is cool. Let's try that.
Yeah.
So another man, but man is not good because we don't want 2 mans. Let's cap this too. Oops. Okay, what's this guy going to be like? How do you want to describe this guy?
I was getting in my head an aggressive man, but that's so uncreative.
Like give us a sense of some kind of, consider this, like this scene has happened, you witnessed it, the police come and they say, can you describe him? You wouldn't say aggressive.
No.
That's obviously implied in what just took place. So we don't need to cover that detail, but we do need to cover some kind of defining feature because at this point it is about aesthetics. Because we're never going to get to know these guys. They're not important. They're just a prop in the story. So,
I mean,
as an example, it's not going to be this, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I get the point.
Holds him. Yeah. Again, I would want to go in. That's not good enough.
Like tightens him, like that doesn't quite make sense. Tightens him or crushes. Yeah, crushing him. Yep.
Something like that. Like really dynamic, sexy, muscular words.
Yeah.
Yvonne, you've got an idea?
Yeah. Do we really need all this? Could we just say that a hooded man grabs him?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And
I mean, this other one is really like micromanaged what he does.
Yeah.
Grabs him. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. Less
Yeah.
is always more. I was just playing around with the language, but you make a very, very strong point. Yes, because to lean out the page is probably better than to have fun with a description. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. And he doesn't try to. He does. He fights.
Nice. Yeah.
Fights, but can't.
Break free. Yeah. It's so obvious now to me. It's like, why did I not think about this?
Well, listen, this is not unusual. This is not about we all suffer this when we try to work in a silo. Again,
Yeah.
it's all going on in our mind, and we're happy with what we're doing. I get it entirely. I can see the entire world. I understand exactly every character's thoughts and feelings and where they are, but we
Yeah.
lose track of the loss in translation between our brain and the page.
Mm.
And this is all about narrowing that gap as much as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. You're forced to watch it.
And this is not, like, I'll let you decide how far you want to go with it, of course.
Yeah.
But we want the most,
Mm.
whatever the words are that are the most of the idea that you want to kind of communicate.
Mm.
Now, this is interesting.
Mm.
This is a turn in the story. So tell us a little bit about what's going on here, because this looks like an attack, but suddenly she's not responding like it is.
So I love films, and I can go through every scene of my screenplay and be like, this scene is from this film, this scene is from that film, this scene. Well, I just reference everything. Maybe that's a bad thing, but this is basically referencing the opening of Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill, and it's a fantasy where the woman gets taken in a shower, but then she starts to enjoy it, and then she wakes up. So it's kind of, and that's James's nightmare. Like, this is a nightmare for him because he's so paranoid of this happening. So he's watching his lover getting taken. She's struggling, but then actually, oh no, this man's better. Like, I like this man much more. He's much more masculine than James, for example. So that's kind of the point of it. Like, it's a fantasy, so it's supposed to be a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, if that's the case, then we would probably talk about how to lean into that even further to make it seem more fantastical.
Yeah.
Like I don't know why, but I immediately think of the dream sequence in an American Werewolf in London, where
Okay.
it's a normal looking scene, and then suddenly the pig
Yeah.
Nazis come in and murder everybody.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely insane. And you may not want to go that far or be that kind of outrageous about it, but at the same time, you're underlining that this isn't real. Now, again, that's part of the conversation too. Do we want the audience to think this was real and actually happened? Like, how far do you go? But that's all a part of the choices that you've got to make. So, worth talking out anyway. Worth articulating to somebody else and watching their reaction. And if they get what you're up to, then keep going. If they're confused, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. But I see what you're doing. I like it. Like, is this even something, maybe an idea again there? She's in on it. The character's
Yeah.
in.
I like that.
Can we say, for example, instead of she starts to enjoy it, we can say she enjoys it?
100%. Yeah. Sorry, I looked right past it, but yeah, well, that's what we were saying.
Yeah, good
Starts
point.
to. Don't ever do that. Never say starts to, begins to, unless they're going to be interrupted. That's the
Okay.
only time that you use that. Okay. And if you really want to get nasty about it, then now she's really kind of making him feel something. Oh, enjoys, not enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, really emphasizing the points of what's happening now, how it's quickly changed.
Yeah. And the
More
more that
dramatic.
you can study kind of human psychology and symbolism and dream stuff, the more you can kind of capture and use these kind of iconic images. Like, mythology often uses in their storytelling, where an actual image will be worth, as I say, 1,000 words, right? There's so much meaning buried into certain kind of symbols and kind of motions and that type of thing, that if you get really good at that type of thing and you've got a whole vocabulary of that, like a big box of crayons of symbols, you kind of weave those through your stories, then they get more potent too. And with much fewer words, people understand more deeply what it is that you're trying to communicate. So that's more advanced. That's something to kind of aspire to, but never turn down a chance to kind of study symbolism, because it's really important. Because what's more cinematic than symbolism? And we are trying to write stories in pictures. It's a weird kind of thing that we are doing here, because we're using words like novelists do, but our words are, for the most part, only describing pictures, images. It's like we've got just kind of a flip book of images, and that's how we're telling our story. We're describing one image after another.
Yeah.
And this is, so now we're getting towards the end of the scene, and we're starting to compose what I describe as the button.
Yeah.
The button's a term which is the last image or line or moment of some kind, like the most effective way to end the scene. Something strong. Never let kind of like a scene climax and then fade out and overstay its welcome. The rule is that you want to start the scene as late as possible, and you want to get out of a scene as early as possible. And just give us the good stuff in the middle. Too many people think they have to ramp up to the action in a scene, and they'll have characters kind of standing around and talking for a while. No, cut all that stuff off and get right to the meat of the scene. And then as soon as the scene has made its point, get out. And end as quickly as you possibly can. So we're now setting up the transition into the next scene. So what would be the most potent button on this? You suggested that they put a hood over his head or something like that. But if you were to cut all of that out and you just end on the haunting image of her pointing at him and laughing at him, that might be a much more powerful button than even suggesting that he got hooded or anything like that. You really don't have to go to black if you cut quickly to him bolting upright in bed. We suddenly get it. We get it. It was a nightmare that took place. There's something probably here, but stopping right there at her pointing and laughing is most effective, I think, than what comes below it now. But there might be like a really haunting line of dialogue that she says, or some really particularly thematically relevant image that can haunt him through the story. You know, these kinds of things will be part of our conversation now too. What kind of a puzzle do you want to plant with the audience? Is this last second of that scene is the puzzle. It's most important. This is the paraprosdokian thing. The last word spoken, the last sentence in a paragraph, the last image of a scene is the most important, because that's what the reader takes with them into the next scene. And it will kind of be a lens that they experience everything through for a few seconds before you start feeding them new images and ideas. So if you were to just cut that out, I'm suggesting there's possibly something else in here, maybe. But I think that scene works just as effectively as, or at least as far as the first draft goes, works more effectively like that.
Yeah, I agree, because that's the point of the scene. It's to capture, it's to tell the audience that bit of information at the end where she enjoys it and laughs at James. You know, exclamation mark. That's the point, and that's where you'd cut. I was just thinking as you were talking, maybe as the black thing goes over his head, maybe you have one last little thing where he sees her doing something else, like she fully turns with the man, like fully turns her back against us, and that closes. But we don't necessarily need that. I'm just thinking out loud right now. But no, I do get your point.
It's always worth exploring these kinds of things. But again, where is that turning point? Where did you make the point that you wanted to make?
Yeah.
And everything after that is kind of wearing out your welcome.
Yeah.
Because you run the risk of making the same point over and over and over again, thinking that
you
you're
can repeat
reinforcing
it.
it. Yeah, but all you're doing is actually bleeding the power out of it. It's better to have one really potent moment than having 4 of the similar moments in a row. So again, this was my idea, so I don't expect you to embrace it, but we've got a singular kind of thing that happens that puts the button on the scene, and now let's just get at it. That's the idea I would suggest. That sit well with you?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, that works really
Any,
well. Thank you.
any more thoughts before we move on to the next scene? How does
I
this
don't
now
think.
think of? Sorry, I'm cutting you off terribly. I apologize. But
No.
comment on the scene now after we've gone through the entire thing.
Yeah, I think it captures what I had in my head more. I think with me, I have a very vivid imagination. I can really see the whole film in my head. And I think the way we've laid it out, um, it's capturing like the point of the scene more, and it's faster paced. I think that was my biggest worry, was like it's not coming across as it's supposed to be when you watch it in terms of the pacing. That was my biggest thing. Um, but I think shortening it, what we've done has been really good.
Short and pointy. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's what I
always better.
wanted.
Always better than kind of long and soft and kind of meandering, whatever. And
Yeah.
it wasn't that, but we just kind of honed it a little more. And again, distilling the ideas and the imagery a little more cleanly.
Mm.
Yeah, like when I first read it, I thought I didn't know where you were going, and clearly this is a psychological thriller, so it needs to kind of poke the audience. It needs to be intense. It's a nice way to open up this kind of story
Yeah.
before we maybe settle into kind of context and just the regular day of your protagonist. Horror movies often start that way off too, with like a big bang first or an actual
Yeah.
bang, and then we go to a quieter scene where we set things up.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
a nice device because modern audiences don't have any patience,
No,
and
they
if things are
don't.
too slow, they'll check out on you. But that's good. But another way that this, if it was just about him being haunted by something, but not necessarily as intensely, then another device that came to me while I was watching it was he's taking these photos, he's enjoying the moment with this girl, and then he sees the image in the bag and looks at it, and instead of her appearing, she doesn't appear. It's just an image of the countryside, and then when he looks
Mm.
up, she's not there.
That's
That would
brilliant.
suggest that she was maybe never there, but it was in his head entirely. But again, this is, it's your
That's
choice. Does it work for your story would be the thing, but this is the kind of thing that I do with PPLO. Is that maybe the message that you want to? Is that more effective at pointing in the direction that the story goes? Anyway, your
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, exactly. And there is actually symbolism in this, thinking about it, because it's all about holding on to the past, like capturing a memory and trying to hold on to it. The film is about him being with Lulu, but he starts questioning if she's even real or not, and things like that. And actually, the next few scenes where he meets this nurse, this woman, who has this backstory, and then he starts to think when he's in his back out when he leaves the hospital and he's at home, he's with Lulu, but he thinks maybe Lulu's actually this woman who's come to care for him. So the whole film is about capturing the past and holding on to the past, which is why I like the Polaroid camera. And I also like the idea, the opening shots, him taking a picture at the audience is like questioning like what you see. Like it's about, do you see what I'm trying to say? It's trying to get the audience in on it. So that's what I'm trying to go with the symbolism.
Okay, so then when he steps into frame, then it's a close, and the camera almost covers the entire screen, perhaps.
Yeah,
And then
yeah, it is.
he could step into frame holding the camera up to his eye so we don't see him, and then you dramatically reveal him when he drops it. He smiles, then we cut to the girl in the field. She smiles back, they click a few more pictures. There you go. There's the kind of introductory moment that I think is more accurate to what you were trying to do then. So
Yeah,
it's not that he kind of pops into frame. The more important thing is the camera over face, because you're suggesting like what does he really see and what is the lens through which he's experiencing life. Okay, now we're getting deep into symbolism here,
yeah,
right? Drops down, and then if it's about trying to hold on to the past, then I would actually encourage you to think about that scene that I just described, because what you have right now is something other than what he's remembering coming into view, the hands of the man in the photo, but you could more cleanly make a symbolic kind of statement about the story if it's about her fading away the way that I suggested it. Again, I'm not trying to hard sell any of my own ideas, but
no,
if that's a thematic statement that's going to return throughout the entire story, that might be the way to go.
yeah. That makes really good sense.
And then we get And
Yeah.
in fact, then you could start with the day being nice and sunny and warm. And then as she fades away, it could get dark and storm clouds could roll in. And then he pops, bolts up right out of bed because he's starting to have a nightmare. Was it ever real? Yeah. These are the fun kind of choices that we get to make. But getting deeply into the weeds of your story and the themes of your story is really important so that you know how to capture them in a visual way so that the audience can kind of feel what you want them to feel. Because if you start playing around with competing themes and imagery, it just makes mud and nothing really lands as effectively with your audience because they're kind of contradicting one another in a way.
Yeah.
Anyway, in a short conversation like this, we're never going to get that far, but I love doing this kind of work with clients. It's super fun. And again, it's like you're excavating through all the possibilities and looking for that one gemstone that's perfect for your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we can talk so much about this. I've got so many different things I can go into, but I don't want to obviously waste people's time. Yeah.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I'm sure that everyone would find it interesting because this is about process, and newer writers are struggling to find a process that's right for them.
Yeah.
The most important thing, I'll just quickly say this, the most important thing I've ever learned from one of the other gurus that I've studied under is process. And it's a little different for everybody else. But if you don't have a predictable, kind of repeatable process that you can count on when you're writing, then you're sort of wandering around in the dark. So having one is really, really important. And maybe another time I can walk you through mine and just see whether it works for other people too.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that knowing what to do next is a huge, huge bonus for people because most writers struggle. I think we've all been there where like, now what do I do? I know things are working not quite the way I want them to, but I don't know why, and I don't know exactly what to do about it. Process will often solve those kinds of frustrating moments for you. You know where to go next. You know the questions to ask. Really powerful.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of training out there about process itself. There's how to do Pagecraft. You can buy books on that. You can be like how to construct a story, but not a lot on process itself. So it's worthwhile having a conversation about that. We should do that in future sometime, just for fun. Okay, next scene. Interior, hospital ward, night. That's great.
I did a heading for once.
We're not in a ward, we're in a room.
Yeah.
So we could, and is it a psychiatric hospital?
Yeah.
Okay.
To be honest, this is where I'm not even sure, to be honest. If I'm being honest. It's yeah.
And I don't want to overplay it. We talked about mystery and not giving too much away, blah, blah, blah. But it's not just that we're standing in the corridors of a ward, right? We're actually inside a room. So more accurately, decide how you'd want to describe the room and go with that. And for everyone who doesn't know, when you're doing a header like this, a scene header, sometimes people refer to it as a slug line. Start with interior or exterior. That's pretty obvious. Then you go with the most general details of the location to the most specific. So it could be hospital room, night. That's the order in which to do it. And never do more than 2, because you definitely never want to get like a scene heading that goes all the way across the page, and certainly never one that wraps around to a second line. That's death. For me, I tend to do stuff like this.
Yeah.
In my own personal style, I double dash the last bit, but this is minor. Some people put a dash between each. This is minor. If you ever present a script to somebody and they give you trouble about this type of thing, they're probably not going to work with you, and you don't want to work with them because they're not paying attention to the important things. If they just want to crab at you about minor details like this, then move on, is my advice.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. Bolts, shoots, shoots, bolts. Again, verbs are critical, so play around with the right word, find one that you like. And here is a very interesting detail. Tell us about that.
I just threw that in at the last minute because I felt like I needed to describe that he was in a state of panic. He's just woken up and he's sweating, or so a stench of sweat. I was trying to be clever since after reading Alien and hard times. I was like short, snappy kind of sentences. I was trying to be clever with that little sentence there.
Well, we can't.
Delete it. Yeah.
We can't appreciate the smell.
Yeah.
The smell is fun. I like to play with it. I get into trouble for leaning on it a little too much. Some people don't use it at all because, of course, someone sitting in the seats of an audience, auditorium watching a movie, they don't do smell-o-vision anymore like they tried in the 50s. So
No.
you're not going to really appreciate the smells, but you can describe a character in the story responding to smells. That's kind of the way that I try to do it. But in this scene, that's not really effective. That's not a part of it. So this is, again, a visual detail that you wanted to kind of share with the audience member. And there's other details too. If he's had a nightmare and he's soaked in sweat, suggesting that it went on for a while, then he's going to be breathing really deeply as well. You know, like, think about the environmental details that you can share with people that helps put the audience in the room with that person. His voice, like his breathing might be hoarse because he's just wheezing and, you know, breathing really heavily. And that's a fun detail that makes it more vivid and real for us. So think about those kinds of things. Saeed, what have you got?
Maybe we can have some rapid eye movements.
Yeah, and wide-eyed, you know, like all those things. Yeah, we don't get to see his face, so it's hard for us to really appreciate the emotional state that he's in. So maybe capture some of that too. Seems like an important moment to maybe let's appreciate what he's dealing with, and not in such a kind of distantly observed fashion. Let's get a little closer to it and see how he's responding to what he just went through.
Yeah.
And then we've got a pre-lap into the next scene because we're hearing dialogue, we're hearing sounds from the next scene in this one. Is that how you planned it?
It's an editing choice, and that's why I wrote it. But yes, we're kind of looking and reciting the voice, and then it cuts to the next scene as they continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Look for that. That's the term they use when you're hearing audio from the next scene about to happen, but we're not there yet. The first detail of the next scene is the audio. So, and there's variations on how to do that, but that's the term to think about if you're going to play with that device, which is cool because that is a nice transition piece. I can't stress to people, we don't have time for it today, how important transitions are. Transitions are not dead space between scenes. They are the bridge between scenes, and how you deal with those is just as important as the rest of the story. Because if you don't have a handle on how to do transitions effectively, then your story is going to feel more disjointed. It's not going to feel as cohesive. And more people are kind of familiar with the transitions between Act 1 and Act 2. Like, we get what that's kind of about, but scene to scene is just as important. Anyway, so that pre-lap helps pull the audience into the next scene seamlessly, which is great.
Should I still have the voiceover? Well, the VO next to it. Yeah,
because it's not a part of this scene.
Yeah.
And does everybody understand the difference between VO and OS? VO is voiceover, which means it's a voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. OS means it's coming from the scene in the space, but just off camera. We can't quite see who's talking, but they are in the space that we're describing in the scene. So that's the two basic differences between that. Okay, now we're in the hospital office, morning. See, I don't have an issue with this because it's being more specific. We know that we're in an office now. Okay, looking directly at Dr. Farley, talking to a support worker. And this is a typo, I think.
Oh, yeah, typo.
Okay, no worries. This is first draft. There's going to be tons and tons of that stuff in here. Nobody should ever feel badly about that. I'll tell you again, I say it every time. First drafts are always going to be an awful, horrible mess. They're going to be absolute garbage. That's normal. Do not worry about that, and do not try to avoid it. Let it happen, and then just go in later and fix it. Not a big deal. And you'd want to maybe say, up here, we don't have to use the OS.
Okay.
And in fact, we don't know who that is. We can't appreciate that. So I don't think that's...
Okay.
I think we'd go like this.
Okay.
And if we do this, we get it down to one line. And it doesn't hurt us a bit.
Yeah.
Yes, Yvonne.
Yeah, my question would be, why is she off screen? Is she not in the room?
She is in the room. Again, this is an editing thing, which I just imagined in my head that we're looking at the doctor first, and we're listening to his key information, and then when we do reverse, we do eventually eventually she's not off shot, further down in the scene, and that's because I wanted to see her face at that particular moment. So it's like an editing choice. That's why I did it, I think.
But then she's more off camera than off screen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. Okay, but
Okay, yeah.
we're moving quickly. I love all these questions. Yeah, Yvonne, you're obviously well versed in Pagecraft. That's great, but we don't need that so much. I would suggest you start with describe the room briefly. Let us appreciate the space that we're in, the lighting, because you can capture a lot of the tone of the movie based on kind of just the atmosphere that we're in now. And in order for people to be able to picture this movie in their mind, they do need a little bit of help. Oftentimes, where are we is the first question they're going to ask whenever we're put into a new scene. Where are we? So a little bit about the scene. You know, there are scripts out there that don't do it, but I tend to kind of be more conservative because I don't want to lose anybody along the read. Give them a little bit of details about the scene, what's in there. And if these are important characters, it's also an opportunity to learn about them based on their environment. Are there diplomas behind the doctor telling us who he is and what he does? Because just referring to him as Dr. Farley, that's not going to get to an audience member necessarily, right? When we first meet him. And what's he wearing? Is he wearing the traditional kind of, lab coat kind of thing? What else? What can we learn about the character and the environment? In a very kind of brief description. And then you could go to close on or angle on or something like that. So we only see him if that's what you want to do. And then you can come out of it and reveal the other character that he's been speaking to. That kind of thing, I think, is what you're describing.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, so we can do these things, the close on, close ups. We can write this stuff.
Yeah, close on
Yeah.
or angle on. These have survived because, for those who aren't familiar, describing specific camera movements, especially with the word camera in them, is a no-no. Nobody wants you to do that anymore. That's considered really, really a faux pas because you're trying to kind of direct the movie and that's not your job. But you can suggest camera movements. And this is one example. Another one that people fight over constantly, which I find hysterical, is the we see. But know that we see is used very commonly in very high-profile projects. It's still there. It's legitimate. Don't be afraid of it. And again, if anybody wants to bark at you about it, just walk away. They're not worth arguing about. Big movies use we see. You just don't want to overuse these kinds of things. Use them sparingly and try to avoid using them wherever possible. But if it's important because you think that kind of reveal is really important to the scene, and be prepared to justify it if you want to do it, and pretend that you're going to have a conversation with a producer who says, well, why do we need 2 shots here when we can do 1? Why do you want to waste our time and our money with this shot? What is it about that shot that actually helps us tell this story? Think about that, and don't just make these choices for novelty's sake or to try them on for fun. I mean, if you're writing a script just for yourself, spec script early on, then sure, try everything on. But if you're going to go into industry with it or present it to a professional or put it into competition, make sure you can justify all of your choices, because many of them cost money. And when we're writing, we don't think about that kind of thing. Like writing a $500 million movie is fun, but who's going to pay for it? That's the point. Okay, so and in fact, you really don't need this if we go that route, right? Now we can spend a little time on kind of describing his essence if we want to, if he's an important character. Because when you get down here to the response, which is off screen, then that's implied. We don't have to duplicate information and slow down the read with it. And flash on, I don't see that as often. And again, there are differences between North America and Europe. So maybe that's more common in Britain and other places, but I don't see flash on. Might get like an insert or again, an angle on here, something like that. But we just did a close up on the doctor. So maybe I would want to choose to do one or the other and describe the doctor's framing in a slightly different way. You know,
Yeah,
like
in fact, yeah, we don't actually need that information when I put flash on. That was a stylistic editing choice that I added.
Okay.
Just watching, just a quick, but we don't. It does. I don't think it actually adds any information to the scene if we're being really critical.
Yeah, because there's what they refer to as a real-time issue here as well. Real-time meaning that everything that we describe is happening in the moment. Even flashbacks are happening in the moment, just in the past, right? So all of the action takes place exactly in the moment as we're describing
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
when you get into like loose descriptions, like they bring it to James,
Mm.
I'm going to make an extreme kind of point here just to illustrate what I'm talking about. They could prepare it in one room and walk it to James in a totally different room. So this could be several minutes of time just in that one sentence. It's unclear. That's the problem. It's unclear as to how
Yeah.
much time it's going to represent. Like when people say, she walks home. Well, holy cow, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is she on the other side? Is she 10 feet away? Is she 10 miles away? We don't know. So you've got to be really specific. She could be walking home. She exits frame in the direction of her home might be what you mean to say, because that's all we're going to capture on screen. But we're not going to follow her for 40 minutes as she walks all the way home. That's so think about this concept known as real time. It has to be happening in the moment. But you could cut away. You could do a mini slug, which is kind of like this is not going to work. Where once you've established spaces, you can get away with not doing a full scene heading. You can do what they call a mini slug, and you can cut back and
Yeah.
forth between things and create kind of an intercut. But I might want to have, like maybe back here, this could be over top of a pharmacist preparing something. And then we cut into the room, and then we could cut back to the pharmacist kind of walking it into James. Anyway, tons of options, more to think about. But if you don't need this, then Oliver, what's the rule?
Get it. If it's not needed, then it needs to be cut. Basically.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
wording is if it can be cut, it should be
Yeah.
cut.
If it can be cut,
So-
yeah.
Then let's do that. But I like what you were playing around with there. It's a nice image, and you're telling a piece of the story that we don't get here. So maybe there's another way to insert that kind of imagery in underneath another scene or between scenes as a transition, something like that. Worthy of conversation and consideration for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's what we see. There you go. Some people would want to burn you down for that. It doesn't matter to me at all, but this scene is so cut and dry that I don't think you need it. If you've set up that close up and then you back away from the close up, opening up the room, then you might not need it here at all. Just that transition from close to a wider shot would imply it. But anyway, Miss Penn, yeah, like I prefer that we start there. But anyway,
Okay.
And any idea of her rough age?
She's
the same as very similar to the young girl in the first scene. Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well then, when you describe that girl in the first scene, blonde hair, whatever, the physical features are now kind of taking priority in my mind because you're going to want to match them when you describe this character.
Got it. So I need to add those descriptions of the physical attributes, maybe a little bit more then.
I think now we're starting to discover that that's justified because the similarity between the two characters is now an important part of the story. So you're going to want to describe the similarities, not to just say something mindless like she's sexy, like which is often really, really boring. And a lot of people are still rating like that. Yeah, we get it. But why is that important is the question. So, I won't put it in here, but let's just say 20s, whatever.
Yeah.
and if she's got, and how far do you want to go? Is it just that she's blonde and both characters are blonde? Is it she has a particular kind of cut? Does she wear a particular kind of glasses that the other? All of these things are kind of an important consideration. How similar do you want the audience to see them being? Are they going to be played by the same actor? Is my question for you as the producer.
Do you know what? I've made a short film version of this, and it was by the same actor, but it didn't quite work because we didn't have a good wig. I think there would be two different actors, in my opinion. It's like the film. Have you seen the film Persona, by Ingmar Bergman? Have you seen Persona, 1966, I think? Okay, so it's
No.
two women. One's a nurse and one's the patient. They don't look identical. They're two different people, but they do look similar. Their identities kind of merge together, and that's kind of the point of the film. You don't know if they're the same person representing two different sides of the same person. So I think there will be two different actors for
Okay,
this film.
then to, if the point then is just to trigger like a familiarity in your lead, like he seems familiar with her, or she seems familiar to him rather,
Yeah.
then yes, two different actors. They could both be blonde. One can be short hair. One can be long hair. Whatever, that kind of thing. And then there would be a conversation about how similar you'd want them to be. And at that point, if they are a bit different people, then their mannerisms, I think, and the phrasing and how they speak might be an important thing to trigger why she feels familiar to him. She might say things in a particular kind of way, or she might bite her nail in a particular kind of way, or brush her hair a particular kind of way, just like the other girl in the first shot did. But you don't have a lot of room there, so it's probably going to come down to one thing. What's the kind of definitive moment for that character in the first scene that you can kind of echo here and help the audience understand why he sees them as being similar and maybe wonders if they're the same person? Help that along with the audience so they can understand what you're up to there.
Got it. Yeah. I understand. Yeah, I need
we
to think
didn't
about
really
that.
talk about, yeah. Again, this is the kind of deep conversations that we have when we start out, and some of this can only get discovered later on, but we try to sort out these kinds of details and devices that you want to employ in your work as early on in the process as we possibly can. So when I do a 6-month kind of engagement with a writer, because 5 months of it is just Pagecraft like this, just drafts, going through it, polishing, distilling. And the first month is all about concept development. Really, really important. Nobody talks about it. Everybody that works in Hollywood will tell you that people go to paper way too fast. Like they go into drafts way too quickly before their ideas are really, really distilled and totally fleshed out. And that's why 99% of scripts never make it and never had a chance to make it, because the concept wasn't fleshed out well enough. It wasn't perfected before the writing began. And so in those conversations, we talk about all these kinds of things. What do you plan on doing? Why? What are you trying to achieve? All that kind of stuff. And it really does pay off, because when you've got all that sorted, when you sit down, you can just get to the fun part. You don't have to be an engineer and a painter at the same time. You can just fill in the colors and have fun with the moments, because you kind of know where you're going and you know why you need those things already.
Yeah.
Too many people think that takes the fun out of it when you do pre-planning and they like to wander around in the dark. I'm telling you, very, very, very few, if any, professionals who have to deliver on time work that way. You need to know what it is that you're doing, get everything sorted as quickly as possible. And I could go on about that for hours and hours and hours. But anyway, Saeed.
Yeah, just a quick question. When you say concept development, is something that goes to logline and premise, right? Something that
Logline is one of the tools that you use to prove that you do have a solid concept and that people are interested in it and that it's marketable, right? You've got something that the market is interested in. You're not just writing for yourself, you're writing for an audience, and it's a larger than smaller audience, so that your producers and executives feel confident that if they put $10 million into it, they can get 20 out. You know, that type of thing. It can't just be an exercise in entertaining yourself, which is why genre is so important, because you're actually speaking to a particular group of people. If they're into thrillers, then they're looking for thrillers. They like to go to thrillers. They're going to go to see another one eventually, and they'll have a shot, or they'll take an interest in yours probably if you speak to them in their language. And you can promise them that they're going to get the thriller experience when they go see your movie. So again, I can't stress how important genre is in becoming a specialist in a genre that you like to write in. That's really, really important. Hollywood packages things in genres. They say they don't buy and sell, scripts, actors, directors. That's not it. They buy and sell genres. So you really have to know your stuff when it comes to genre.
Absolutely. And if you want to be an auteur, if you want to be unique, they will try and package you as a person as well. Like Alfred Hitchcock, he's the king of suspense kind of thing. They want to label you as well as the script. They put everything together because it's all about selling. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're new, then they're not going to package something around your name because your name doesn't carry any weight yet. So it would be your work, which even makes the fact that you know what you're doing when it comes to genre more important. And then they're going to try to dogpile it with a really effective director and a really good cast, all that kind of stuff, just to elevate how attractive it is to people. But it always comes back to genre. Yeah, 100%. You can't read, study, practice enough about learning how to write within a genre effectively. And here's an interesting exercise. Well, before you sit down to write your screenplay, go on to ChatGPT or whatever your favorite AI is and say, give me a list of, I'm serious, this many, 200 to 300 of the most common, popular, and definitive attributes of a thriller movie.
Wow.
And it'll just go, and it'll write down all of these things that people have come to expect from that genre. And then just look at it. Read it a couple times before you sit down to work or every time when you sit down to work. And are you actually telling your story with that language? When you think you're writing a thriller, but are you writing a thriller as far as the rest of the world is concerned? That's really important. And the sooner you kind of consider that type of thing in the process, the better.
That's a really good point. When we were talking to Brooks Elms last week, he was talking about how you want to do the same but different. So you want to do the same, as in you want to tick all the boxes that the genre will give you, because the audience, they don't want to take risks when they're buying their movie tickets. They want to know what they're going to get. But you still want to do it, in your unique voice, which is the bit that makes it a little bit different. There's that kind of balance, isn't it?
It's super important. Yeah. Whenever we're talking about genre, can feel confining to some people when they think, well, I have to do all of these things. Well, sort of, yes. You have to address all of these things that people expect out of that genre for sure. But then you definitely need to kind of put a nice twist on it that we haven't seen before. So yeah, the phrasing is the same but different, because a lot of people are marching around today saying that what people want is a completely original piece of work. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. They want something that feels fresh for sure, but they want to see the story models that they recognize and enjoy in it. They want a thriller and they want to have the thriller experience delivered to them for sure, but they want to see it in a kind of new and reinterpreted way. And if you're going to innovate, and first you have to learn the rules. You have to know what the fundamentals are before you can innovate. A lot of people try to just jump to innovation, and it's just a mess. It doesn't work. But if you know what a classic thriller is, and you know what that experience is for the audience, then you can start to subvert it, play around with it a little bit, but you can never wander too far off. The further away you get from what people have come to expect from that genre, the less popular it's going to be. That's just the way that it is, because to a certain degree, this is kind of comfort food for people. I love thrillers. I want to go see another thriller, and I've got expectations as to what that's going to be. So surprise them. But there's an interesting phrasing that somebody taught me that says, your story should be both surprising and inevitable in what happens. And I was like, ooh, that's really interesting, right? So there's a logic to it internally within the story and then framed within the genre. But there's, something special about it that's different, where they can't quite see where you're going. You're following the kind of story form and the patterns that are recognized and expected, but they can't quite get to the finish line in their mind before you do, which is perfect. You want to give them just enough of a peek at where you're going so that they can see, because if they don't, like if they get to the end of Act 1, if you're lucky enough to have your audience get to the end of Act 1, and they can't figure out what the story is about or where it's going, they'll check out. So they have to kind of see what you're setting up, and then you get to surprise them with where it actually goes. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Would you say sometimes it's not about what happens, because some people might know what's going to happen, but it's how it's going to happen that's more important? Would you say that's true?
That's definitely something to explore. That's not always the case. That doesn't always work, because if it's too predictable, it's boring.
Yeah, of course.
If they literally know how it's going to end, then they're not going to wait around to find out. they'll move on to something that's kind of like a bit more mysterious, because that's when they lean in and invest more. If they can watch 5 minutes and go, yeah, I got it, and check out, then they will. So again, it's all about this kind of razor's edge of familiarity and unfamiliarity, and you need to just walk right down the middle of that as effectively as you possibly can. It's a really fun and exciting challenge. Frustrating also, but fun.
Yeah, it's like for example, in Harry Potter, I knew that Harry was going to kill Voldemort at the end, but I still wanted to watch it because it was how it was going to happen that I was interested in. Or in Tarantino's Kill Bill, I knew that he's going to kill Bill, but it's how it's going to happen is what I was curious to see. It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yep, that's right. There's a thing that takes place at the end of Act One that's sometimes referred to as the main dramatic question, or the main or the dramatic question, or the MDQ. But there's a point in the story at the end of Act One where the audience has to be fed enough information that they can think this question in their mind. Is he or she going to do it? Is he or she going to pull this off? You've presented the problem and the obstacles in the way, and we understand clearly what the protagonist plans to do about it and how they're going to achieve what they think their initial goal is. And then we can go, oh, that's interesting. That looks almost impossible. Are they going to pull this off? And if they don't have the ability to ask that question by the end of Act One, most people wander off. Doesn't matter how interesting the individual details are. They don't know what you're up to. They don't get it. They really want a linear kind of concept at the heart of it, and that's the essence of what they call high concept kind of storytelling. It's something that you can understand immediately. Like Lord of the Rings is great, right? We got this evil ring. We got to take it over there and dump it in the mountain. Let's go. Everybody gets it. There's no question about where the story's going. It's like, what's going to happen along the way, and are they going to pull it off? Cool. So boiling your concept down, that's an important part of concept development, is can the audience see that immediately in the trailer, even by looking at the poster? Do they get what this movie is about? Because if there's any confusion, like I was hinting at the beginning of our talk, confusion is death. If they're confused about what it is and what it's about and how the story works, people tend not to go for it. I can't remember that story, but that the Wachowskis did. I think it was the Wachowskis that jumped around in time, and the cast members played like different characters and they were like hundreds of years apart sometimes. Tom Hanks was in it. Oh, I can't remember what it was. Nobody could figure out.
Cloud Atlas.
Yes, thank you, Todd. That's great. Yeah, did that movie perform well? No. Conceptually, it was almost impenetrable. We couldn't figure out what it was, and forcing the audience to jump around from cast to cast to cast is a big ask. So most people in wider audiences kind of bounced off that thing because they just didn't get it. And again, this is why genre is so important, and speaking to the attributes of genre is so important, because if the executives or your director, whatever, read this thing and can't figure out how they're going to package it, because if they can't figure it out, then they can't figure out how they're going to describe it to an audience and sell it. Well, what's the trailer going to look like for this thing? It was too convoluted. It was too obtuse. We can't capture it really quickly. Feels risky. I don't want to make this movie. So a simple concept at the center of it is good. And then the potential for tons of mysterious complications along the way, that's good. But again, mystery to the point of confusion, bad.
Yeah, it's a fine line, and it's probably a hard genre to write in, this kind of mystery, because you're giving breadcrumbs to the audience, but it's so easy just to then get them confused. And I think more so for what I'm writing, I need to definitely be constantly asking people to read it and ask them questions and see if they understand what's going on. This is so interesting.
Yeah, you can't frustrate your audience. That never pays off either. And with mysteries, like straight up mysteries and thrillers, sometimes, well, generally speaking, it's good to start with the end. Like every movie, it's good to know where it ends and then fill in between the two. When you've got a rough idea of what it is, how does this movie end? If you can't answer that early on, don't start writing. Good grief. Don't just like, I'll figure it out as I go. No, don't do that. Because just consider for a second here. I know a lot of people are really defensive of pantsers and that whole process where they just kind of discover the movie, the story as they read it. Look, I don't want to make people feel bad about it, but consider being a writer, a professional writer working for a studio, or a writer in a writer's room on a TV show. You get hired and they say, okay, and this is true, we had 3 months to write the pilot of this concept for this series. Now we got it greenlit. We're going to production. We've got a dozen, I don't know how many people we've got in this writer's room. You've got 3 days to write the next episode. 3 months for the pilot, common. 3 days for every episode after that. Now imagine them trying to pay you and you saying, I'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna figure it out as I write it. Their mind would go, no, we don't have time for that. You have to get it done, and you have to get it done fast, which is again why process is so important. Like you do not have time to mess around and stumble around in the dark. If you're writing for yourself, like a self-published novelist or something like that, great. Go spend years writing your novel, whatever you want to do. But in this industry, generally speaking, you got to know where you're headed, and you have to know exactly the experience that you're trying to capture. And you've got to have a pretty nicely polished process along the way, or you're just going to fall behind and people aren't going to hire you because they can't count on you. You're never going to get hired and paid on like contractually, like if they don't know that you can do it. And if you try to convince them that you can do it, maybe, I don't know. I just like to start at the beginning and right towards the end. You're going to freak them out.
Yeah. Yeah. I isn't Todd, didn't you tell me that you like to block everything out? You're a big fan of literally beginning to end blocking everything out. Is that what you were saying to me, Todd?
Yeah, that's my process. I'm pretty big on outlining. I spend a lot of time working out all the issues in the outline because it's just, for me, it's easier to see the bigger picture and move things around and change things as necessary, even the character arcs and all of that. So I don't start a script until I have every single scene plotted out with dialogue, potential dialogue, what's going on in the scene, and then I refine it in the first draft of the script.
Yeah.
Great. You're hired.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Honestly, you need to be predictable. You're never going to make a living at it anyway if you can't be predictable. You know, if you can't depend on your own process to be able to deliver in a certain amount of time because you've left too many questions unanswered. And most of the time, I can't stress that enough, most of the time, even talented writers who are pantsers will write themselves into a corner. And when they're done, there will be things that don't quite work. And it's a ton of work to correct it when you've got 100 pages, as opposed to having an outline, which is like 1 or 2 pages. Like, it's an enormous mess. And sometimes you can't even see exactly what the problem is. You can just tell that it's not working. And that breaks the back of a lot of new writers who don't have process going for them or are just too stubborn to get into outlining and that type of thing up front because they don't like that stuff. It's too architectural and it's not the fun part, you know, but you've got to have discipline. You've got to work a little more like a pro. I'm sorry. That's just the way that it is if you want to get paid.
I was just going to say, if someone is hiring you to write something, for me, I'll make sure that they read this outline and are okay with it because the script is not really going to change from the outline. So I want to make sure that everybody is on board with what I'm doing and they sign off on it before I even hit the script.
That's great. You're hired again. And like testing your work on other people, if it's in a professional, like hired, you know, contractual setting like that, then yes, obviously there's going to be back and forth and they're probably going to want to see your work. Like a treatment might even be part of the process. First, like a 1-pager, then an outline, then maybe a treatment, and then first draft. Like they want to check in everywhere along the way. They're not just not going to throw a wad of cash at you and let you go nuts for 3 months. That's not it. That's way too risky too. And when I'm working with new writers or people that just want to really get into like finding their voice and specializing, then we'll test it out in a 1 sentence, which is kind of like a pre-logline logline. At 5 sentences, which represents the turns that take place in Act 1, 2A, midpoint, 2B, and 3. Then I've got a process where we do something similar to the Save the Cat beat sheet, but I got a lot more details in it. It's a little different, but it's 17 sentences. Then there's a structural exercise that breaks that out into 40 sentences, and then from 40 sentences to 40 paragraphs, which is basically a treatment. And then from that, it goes into the first draft. And we take real care at each step and test it in totally unique ways, each step along the way, to make sure that we're addressing everything that could be a problem as early on in the process as possible, and testing every time, every single time we test it on people. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And we learn from that and grow. And by the time we get into first draft, I'm here to tell you it's still an awful mess because first drafts always are. But man, most of the fundamental architectural problems have been addressed. The themes are well under their way, like well on their way of being fully developed. They're right in there. They're baked into everything. It's cohesive. It flows right. The structure's right. The pacing's right. All that's right. And then you can just sit down and have fun writing. So that's what I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but that's the process that I use, and it's been very, very effective. Yvonne.
How long do you usually take for this process before you start writing the first draft?
We get to that 17-sentence version of it in 1 month. So I have 4 sessions with a writer, 1 session a week, and then I assign tailored homework for them between sessions, and we stay in touch between as well. And then we'll sit down, we'll have another 2-hour session. And then after that, for the next 5 months after that, it's like 1-hour sessions, and it's all about the Pagecraft. And we go quickly from the 17 to the 40 and into that first draft. So by the end of the first month, by the end of the second month, we have a full draft. And then we are refining for the other 4 months. And I mean, it stretches a little bit depending on the person that I'm working with and what their life is like and how much time they've got to devote to it. But in generally speaking, we can go from nothing, not even an idea, to a fully fleshed out and reasonably professional screenplay that they won't be embarrassed to present to somebody in 6 months. That's a pretty healthy framework to do it, if you can commit the time to it. Because it's, as everybody in this room knows, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah. And we didn't really talk about it before we started, but normally we only go an hour and a half and we're pushing 2 hours. So that's why I pulled out of the script. I'm sorry we didn't get that far, Oliver, but I hope that was useful and kind of informative anyway.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for doing this. I wasn't actually expecting us to go through 5 pages because, like you said, we can spend hours just on the first page, can't we? There's so much you can dissect. And this has been so interesting. It just highlights how much detail you can go into every single word. I think Brooks Elms also said that every word is a choice. Like, choose each word wisely. I know that sounds hard work, but I think if you want to write a great screenplay, you want to be really picky with what words you use, and everything's a choice. Every single word you put on your page. He literally said he can tell if a script is bad from the first page. I think he said something like that. From the first sentence, you can tell.
Every reader can. This is what they do for a living. And in fact, professional readers, when they pick up the script, if it's a printed copy, they'll know by its weight. If the weight isn't right, they'll toss it. It sounds insane, but there are people that work like that because, again, they've got stacks of scripts to go through. They're looking for a reason to get rid of it. They're looking for one that's as close to perfect as possible. So you want to be really kind of bold and innovative in your storytelling, but when it comes to Pagecraft and how you present it, that's not the time to bend the rules because you don't want anybody pushing back on those choices. So you want to go right down the middle of the road for that kind of stuff. And there should be no whatever choices. Never have a detail in your script that's like, filler. I don't know what to put here, so I'm just going to put this. No. Everything has to be relevant. Every single detail has to be relevant. And when we get into the subject of theme, every single detail of your screenplay should be thematically relevant. And that's a whole nother subject, which is really kind of nebulous and frustrating for a lot of people. But a lot of what I do through that process is to, again, check in on the themes and everything. It's a big part of the first month and the concept development for them to be able to articulate their themes and describe how they're infusing it into their work, how they deploy theme in their work. Because theme is not only the glue that holds everything together, but it's the very thing that gives your work meaning. And if you don't have a handle on theme, then you're writing hollow stories that have no chance of moving somebody on an emotional level. It doesn't work. It'll just feel like a series of events. That's how they describe scripts that read like that. So this is not a story. This is just a series of events. And that can be really frustrating for new writers because they don't know exactly what that means, but they're always talking about theme, specifically about the character's arc. And there's nothing in there that's thematically relevant. It's just kind of like this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. So
wasting time.
There's a lot to learn. Yeah, there's a lot to learn in this, which is why, again, we break it out into smaller chunks because it's like, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Like, just take a little bit of it on at a time, learn, test it in a unique way every single time. And and then move forward. Because every time you move through that kind of train track of the process, it breaks apart. It inevitably falls apart, and then you have to put it back together again. And then it falls apart, you put it back together again. So by the time you get to that first draft, you've written the story like a dozen times, and you've really started to figure out how it works, and it pays off.
Yeah.
In my experience, it really does pay off. It's worth the effort.
I bet. Yeah, it just sounds like a really good process, and I think, like you said, everyone needs to have a process as a screenwriter. I think you need to figure that out as soon as possible. Yeah, and I think what you've got, it just sounds really good. It sounds like it definitely works. I'm sure you've had lots of success stories, haven't you, with with people who followed this, and it's done well for them.
Yeah. My proudest engagement was from a woman who had very little formal education, was not a trained writer, had spent a lot of time in jail, as a matter of fact, and in fact, right across the corridor, members of the Manson family.
Wow.
Like, whoa, she's got stories. And nobody wanted to take her seriously because of her criminal past. But I had a chance to meet with her, and I take meetings with everybody because what's most important to me is not that they've got the money to pay me, but that I get along with them and that we connect and we can communicate really successfully. So in our first conversation, we had a great time, got along really well. And I helped her over 6 months complete her first full screenplay ever, and she's currently negotiating with producers. Wow. That's awesome. Nothing makes me happier than that. I could care less about the money. That's going to be much more valuable to me because it obviously reinforces my reputation if she gets her movie made. At her first shot, her first script ever could get to the screen. That's great. And it's pretty good. It's a thriller, as a matter of fact, a crime thriller. And she's got such wild stories that being able to dip into her past and to use them kind of in an effective way to kind of stitch a story together was really, really fun. And I have a blast meeting and working with different people with different voices, different backgrounds, because everybody's got a unique perspective. And this is another element, like developing your personal narrative voice is critical. You have to be writing stories that only you can tell. Otherwise, you are replaceable. And when you're entering this industry, you don't want to be replaceable because you're writing generic stories that anybody can write. So there's a lot of kind of internal reflection and like, who am I? What is my voice about? What are the themes that I can talk about? What can I bring to this that nobody else can? That's a part of that first month as well. And that's not something anybody really talks about a whole lot.